Welcome to the garden. I'm Nikki, your host, and today we'll be looking at why revolution might be an inside job. And to do so, we'll first look at the meta crisis, or the problem, you could say. Then we'll look at some of the underlying causes, where to focus our energy, and finally, what an inner revolution could actually look like. And to begin with, we can look at the meta crisis, or acknowledge that we're living in an age of transformation and crisis in general. And we can see that on many different levels, one being the ecological sphere, where we face biodiversity loss, we're cutting down our forests, we're polluting the whole world chemically, and with PFAS, these forever chemicals that are found everywhere now. We see bees and other pollinators disappearing, the oceans acidifying. We have huge problems with plastic pollution, we have topsoil erosion, the list goes on. Which really goes to show that we're currently very unwise and pretty confused regarding our own resources, and that we're destroying our own habitat and the habitat of many other species. And we see these crises also on a psychological level, because we see growing levels of mental illness, mental health conditions, such as depression, stress, burnout. We have a huge loneliness epidemic. So although we seem to be more and more interconnected, at the same time we also grow more disconnected, more isolated, more lonely. And another sphere where we can see this crisis is, of course, on the social. So we have lots of global conflict and war. We have a refugee crisis, we have starvation and hunger crisis, we have huge wealth inequality, and a lot of political polarization happening right now. So again, many different crises that are interwoven. And the final level is maybe a spiritual level. So these ideologies that we're currently living in, of materialism, of hyper-individualism, of capitalism, they really create a story of separation, that we're separate from each other. And that has its consequences. So many people say that we have to create a new narrative that focuses on connection, or as Thich Nhat Hanh puts it, interbeing. And these crises happen at the same time as we have gained great knowledge and power. So we're much better at understanding nature and manipulating the world. So we've seen great advances in biotech, in nanotech, in artificial intelligence very recently with large language models, and we've had nuclear technology for some time. And anyone who has watched Spider-Man knows that with great power, of course, comes great responsibility, because if we don't wield that power that we have wisely, we might face existential risks, or we are facing existential risks, which means that we have the power to wipe us out, to wipe out most life on this planet. So we better use that power wisely, because this is about evolution as well. And one evolutionary rule is adapt or die. It's not necessarily the strongest that survives, but it's the one that is able to adapt. And this image is one of the Easter Islands, and one hypothesis of why there are no more people there is called the ecocide hypothesis, which posits that they cut down all their forests and could not live on this island anymore. And whether or not that hypothesis is true is not really important. The importance is that this is a very good symbol for our own little island, not in the ocean, but our island in space, our planet. If we're not wise about our resources, we will just not survive. And of course, this crisis can also be seen as an opportunity, which seems like a bit of a cliche, but it's actually true, because we're really facing a fork in the road where we have great power, and we can either use it wisely or not. So if we go down the left path, we really face destruction. And if we go down the right path, we can really create something like heaven on earth. And we can see this moment in our history really as kind of a rite of passage for humanity, or coming of age, or a maturity test. So either we pass that test and we create conditions that are conducive to life, or we might not exist anymore and the experiment of Homo sapiens is over. which would be quite sad because I like living, I like humans, I like other living beings. So maybe we can try to pass that test. And of course, in order to pass that, we might ask ourselves, what are the underlying problems or causes? And of course, there is a myriad of causes. It's like almost infinite. But what are really the root causes that cause this mess that we're in? And one place to start is a beautiful quote from James Speth, who's an environmental lawyer who's been really at the forefront of fighting climate change. And he says, I used to think the top global environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that with 30 years of good science, we could address these problems. But I was wrong. He goes on to say, the top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that. So what he actually says is that the real problems are emotional problems. They're selfishness, greed, and apathy. And his solution for these is that we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And others echo this. Daniel Schmachtenberger sometimes says cultural enlightenment or bust. So either we create this cultural enlightenment, or we might not exist anymore. And James Speth says, we scientists don't know how to do that, how to create a spiritual and cultural transformation. And I would like to add a hopeful, we don't know how to do that yet. Because as we will see in later videos, there's many good frameworks and inner and outer technologies that are actually designed to bring about a spiritual and cultural transformation. The question is whether we're actually doing that. And this focus on emotional problems or inner problems that are actually the root cause is very much echoed by Jiddu Krishnamurti, who says that this crisis is not political or economic or social, but it's a crisis in consciousness. And so what we really need is a revolution and an evolution. So the question is, what does that next step in our evolution and the necessary revolution actually look like? And when we look at evolution, classical evolution in the past, how we evolved, is that we co-evolved with other species. So there were environmental pressures of the entire system, and each species that was in that system had to evolve in order to survive. That's why we're still here. However, now we're not really in contact with any predators that prey on us. We're the apex predator, and we're the only one that can actually destroy us. So revolution and evolution has to take a different turn. So we have to kind of revolve the camera and look at ourselves and evolve on the inside. And two big areas that we have to evolve is our capacity for wisdom and for compassion, which Buddhism could have told us some millennia ago and other contemplative traditions, but we're really catching up to that we have this great power, but if we don't wield it well, we'll destroy ourselves. So we need wisdom. So how to use that power wisely. And another quote that can help us is from Carl Jung, who says that your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. And this era that we live in, we can really see as an era of degeneration. And I think this picture from Alex Gray really illustrates that well. So what we need in general is an era of regeneration. And this is a prompt that I put into ChatGPT for a permaculture garden, because permaculture really, for me, is a very good symbol of what we actually need to do. We need to create conditions that are conducive to life. And one aspect of this regeneration, and important for inner revolution, is of course inner regeneration. And so this, I think, is a necessary prerequisite for actually overcoming our global challenges, is that we regenerate our inner world. And areas that we can focus on are our intention. How can we cultivate a wholesome intention, individually and collectively? How can we train our attention? How can we focus our attention on what actually matters? And how can we cultivate wholesome emotions? And of course, inner regeneration doesn't happen in a vacuum. So in order for inner regeneration to emerge, we need relational regeneration. So we need spaces that are wholesome, that are characterized by belonging, by support, by care, by trust. Because otherwise we cannot regenerate our inner lives. And of course, it goes hand in hand with a systemic regeneration. All of these necessarily have to come together. And this is basically also the mission of the garden, is to go in all these levels and growing together. And this growing together, there is a couple of, not steps, but again, necessary variables to be there. And one is really to create a healthy social soil, characterized by these characteristics that I already mentioned of belonging, trust, support, and care. And once there is such a soil, then we as individuals can grow and thrive and flourish. And together we can then co-create a more beautiful world. And in this endeavor of interpersonal and systemic regeneration, there are some useful approaches. There's of course millions of approaches, but some that I find really useful and that we also focus on in this channel here. One has to do with worldview and vision and narrative. In other words, which way of seeing the world is useful to actually overcome these crises, and which beliefs might we have to let go of. Another big part is inner science and technology, and we'll get into much more detail of what that actually entails. But in a nutshell is how can we actually cultivate these wholesome qualities and intentions and emotions and train our attention and a metacognition. And there's many technologies such as meditation, psychedelics, breathwork, etc. And we get into much more detail, as I said, later on. And another necessary prerequisite is creating communities, building communities, especially communities of practice and support that can really enable us to grow. And yeah, next time we'll look at the rediscovery of inner science. And I think that's it for now. So see you next time. Thanks for watching. Much love.